It is unusual to think that post-Dark Ages, in a time when science, art, music, and mathematics were seeing giant leaps in advancements, that the progress of medicine and health remained relatively stagnant. Many of the medical practices we relied on were based purely on hysteria and superstition. People died of illnesses that are virtually harmless today, and the methods of prevention were so weak that washing hands before performing surgery was considered unnecessary. The extent of medical knowledge was very primitive, and disease gleefully took advantage of this ignorance. Such was the world Louis Pasteur was born in on December 27, 1822, in France. Throughout his lifetime, his accomplishments continually changed how we perceive disease, microbiology, and chemical processes. His tenacious approach to problems and intuitive ideas greatly aided him in his quest for truth. An example of this is his success in dispelling one of biology's erroneous yet long-held and widely believed ideas, that is, spontaneous generation. Spontaneous generation is the idea that life can appear from non-living sources. This explained bacteria, mold, maggots, and other organisms that seem to appear from nowhere. To disprove this theory would need a lot of proof, because the idea had been around for at least 2,400 years. Pasteur used the famous swan neck experiment to show that life had to originate from other life. The experiment included a sterilized broth in a flask with a long swan-like neck. The neck allowed air in, but no particles such as dust or spores. Nothing grew in the flask until it was broken open, thereby proving that life had to come from other life, in this case, bacteria and spores in the air. This is an example of Pasteur's excellent intuition. An example of his practical discoveries has to do with his exploration of fermentation. In the 1850s, Pasteur was introduced to the problem of wine and beer making. The wine and beer would often spoil during fermentation. Pasteur wanted to find out why and how to fix it. After careful observations, he found that lactic acid producing yeast was to blame, and after even more experimenting, he found that you could get rid of the unwanted yeast by heating it. The process became known as pasteurization. This was an industry-changing discovery. Not only did he save a lot of money and time, he also drastically improved the safety of products such as milk or juice. In effect, a life-saving discovery. In addition, pasteurization is now enforced by law in many states. In almost every American household, Pasteur's name is printed on numerous dairy or alcoholic products. Oddly enough, Pasteur's yeast discovery was not the only contribution Pasteur made that helped save an industry. In 1865, Pasteur was tasked with the challenge of figuring out why silkworms were dying at an abnormal rate. He found that parasites were to blame, and after 2 attempts to save the worms, he succeeded, saving hundreds of farmers from poverty. It's amazing that an accomplishment like this can be written as a side note because of all the more historically significant things Pasteur has done. Most of the examples mentioned help Pasteur's work be remembered as vital in the proof of the germ theory of disease. The germ theory of disease states that disease is caused by microorganisms. This theory is hugely significant because the implications of it eventually saved millions of lives. Prior to Pasteur, microorganisms had been observed by Anton von Leeuwenhoek and Robert Hooke. But the idea that tiny, minuscule creatures a few millionths of a meter across could be responsible for the deaths of beings millions of times larger was only just being proposed. But after observing how yeast affects wine and beer and how particles of dust could culture millions of bacteria, it became obvious to Pasteur of the significance of these tiny organisms. Pasteur used the implications of this idea to save millions of lives. Possibly in the long list of scientific breakthroughs that Pasteur contributed to, his most significant ones involve vaccinations. Pasteur knew about Edward Jenner's experiment with vaccines. In 1796, Edward Jenner wanted to pursue the idea that people who have had cowpox were immune to smallpox. Cowpox in humans is a lot less severe than smallpox is, but it still causes lesions in the skin. Jenner decided to test the idea by taking a cowpox lesion and infecting a boy with it. The boy became sick but quickly recovered. Then Jenner infected him with smallpox. But this time the boy remained healthy because he had grown an immunity to smallpox, which was similar to cowpox. The result was the very first vaccine. Louis Pasteur used this idea to tackle diseases that affected humans and animals alike. In the year of 1876, Robert Koch discovered the microbe responsible for anthrax. Pasteur then created a weaker form of anthrax to infect sheep with. This is done in light of Edwards' findings, and the same outcome occurred. The sheep were immune to anthrax. Pasteur now had a logical method for vaccination. This is the first major step forward in disease prevention since Edward Jenner. Pasteur, in effect, saved millions of sheep and chickens as well when a similar approach was applied. Then, in the late 1800s, and possibly the pinnacle of his success in microbiology and disease control, he ingeniously created a rabies vaccine. By taking the spines of rabid rabbits to get a weakened form of rabies, the new vaccine was made. With this new vaccine ready and working, Pasteur saved millions of lives and turned rabies, the disease that killed with 100% efficiency, to a virtual non-existent threat. Each human life is an existence of innumerable worth. Not only did Louis Pasteur save millions with his vaccines, he also revolutionized many fields and industries as well. Wine and beer companies saved money and time, milk and dairy products became a lot safer, microbiology and the germ theory of disease would evolve to become life-saving ideas, hospitals would become cleaner, millions more will be saved because of research directly correlating from Pasteur's, and the silkworm industry had a new solution for parasites. The numerous positive effects resulting from Pasteur's life give sufficient evidence to say that he is a true turning point in history.